Niall Paterson here in the Sky News Daily Studio. Good to have you back with us. Today, we're taking you to Hull. Back in August, like many other parts of England, the city turned violent. An asylum hotel was attacked. Shops were looted, cars burnt out. These sounds that you're hearing were recorded by James and Oscar, friends and neighbours who live in Hull. Now, they didn't participate in the violence. They say they were just there to watch and record what was taking place on their doorstep. But they did share in the anger and frustration. Today's podcast is, in essence, all about them, why they feel the way they do, ignored and marginalised, and why they say they're not racist.
Yeah, so I ain't got a problem being in other people's countries, and I ain't got a problem with being in mine. But when it's taking away all our necessary needs, hospitals, dentists, hotels, this, housing, everything, it's just...
Sky's Sarah O'Connell is responsible for this story, and she joins us in the studio. Good to see you, Sarah. I mean, first and foremost, for those that don't know Hull, just describe it a bit. I mean, I have been there, and the two things that struck me at the time were it's quite a flat place, and it's an incredibly poor place.
Yeah, well, it's one of the poorest cities in the UK. It's not a difficult place to reach, but it's sort of at the end of the line. It's on the east coast of England. You wouldn't pass through Hull. You might pass through York or Leeds or any of the other major cities in Yorkshire, but it's kind of at the end of the line. It's very deprived. The villages around the city are more affluent, but the actual city centre and the town itself is quite poor. It was one of the places that rioted, obviously, and it was one of the places that got less coverage, I think.
So just in terms of the story itself, the motivations of those who were along in the riots, what drew you to this? Because, simply put, I thought we knew.
I've always felt concerned that the white working class feel as if the media doesn't listen to them. And I think there's an element of truth in that. Not entirely, but I do feel that there's a disconnect between people who live on council estates in Hull, as one example, to the people that work in the Sky newsroom, the BBC newsroom. Sky News is not unique. And I wanted to hear the reasons why it's important that we listen to people, whether we agree or not, whether we find their views palatable or not. We should listen to what they're saying.
Why do you think there has been, just before we get into what happened in Hull, but why do you think that there has been, to an extent, and I tend to agree with you, that there has been this ignoring of white working class Brits?
Class is a big issue, I think, and I think it's, class is pretty much ignored. You know yourself, you work in the same newsroom that I work in.
With an accent as well.
Yeah, of course, but we're the rarities. The fact that we've got regional accents, we're quite unusual in the newsrooms. I think there is definitely a disconnect between the poorer communities in Britain and mainstream news media, and it's we need to rectify that, not them.
Given that disconnect, how did you manage to speak to James and Oscar?
Well, apart from my never-ending charm.
Indeed, aside from
my never-ending charm, I had approached them when the riots had happened because I'd learned that they'd actually gone along to the initial demonstration. So I'd already gone to them a couple of times and spoken to them. They were pretty open to talking to me, and one of the things that I've heard repeatedly when I've been speaking to people who attended demonstrations or riots, people have thanked me for listening to them, which is quite humbling as a journalist because really that's one of our jobs is to listen to what people... So I'm not used to being thanked by people for listening to them.
So tell me about these two men, Oscar and James. Now, the first things first, we should make clear that they were not active participants in the violence in Hull.
They weren't rioters. They attended the initial demonstration in the city centre and then went along, followed the crowd effectively and recorded and filmed what was happening. But they didn't actively participate in the riots. They attended the initial demonstration, which then turned into a riot.
Describe their situation, because they saw in the rioters at least an expression of some of what they themselves were feeling.
Well, they're poor. I mean, there's no other way to put it. They live in housing which, I don't know if I'd use the word slum housing, but it's pretty near slum housing when you've got rats running through your house.
I mean, we've had the council out, the landlord's finally pulling his finger out, but I mean, that's took Yeah, it's not the landlord's
When I
fault,
went
it's
into the
not
house the first
council's
time,
drainage.
James said to me, can you hear, can you hear? Because there's rats that scratch inside the cupboard.
They keep changing all the poison. They come out. Oh, they are coming today, aren't they?
Yeah.
To just fill up the trays again, because we rang them yesterday to say they're gone again. You know, they just...
So there's no doubt that that house is rat infested.
The situation is so bad that they've gone and got themselves a cat
Yes.
to try and deal with
Yes,
the rat.
that is the entire purpose. I mean, the cat, to be fair, look like the best fed and most looked after because they love this cat so much. They're really looking after it, but the entire purpose was to get rid of the rats.
Stop them attacking those two as well.
Yeah,
'cause
yeah. I mean, he did wake up with a rat on the end of his nose, which is just horrifying.
But I sleep in here, that's why I sleep on.
Right, okay.
He got bit by a rat, that was the thing.
Did he?
Oh, aye.
Touched me nose.
His nose, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
What, while you were asleep?
Yeah.
But there was a certain sort of weight on them, which is like, this is our life and this is how we live.
So do they believe that the rioting was justified, was deserved, was merited?
The rioting, no, I don't think that they believed the violence was justified. I think they think the protest against asylum seekers or immigrants or migrants or whatever they would refer, because they don't always distinguish between asylum seekers and migrants. All these words and names are intermittently used by them. I don't think they agreed with the violence, but they definitely agreed with protesting outside the hotel.
We were there, watching it all.
What did you make of it when you were watching it?
Deserved. Get rid of them. I just think it's wrong. Because I know a lot of people that are on the streets and stuff, you know, and it's not right. They're not getting the help they deserve, but they just come here illegally and get everything they want. It's not right. But when it's taking away all our necessary needs, hospitals, dentists, hotels, this, housing, everything, it's just...
What is it then in this kind of homogenous group of migrants, let's call them that for the time being, what is it in this group that they see as deserving of that kind of direct action that was taking place?
They feel that they know a lot of people that are living in desperately poor housing or on the streets, homeless. And as we know, there's been a proliferation in food banks in the UK in the past 5 to 10 years. So they know a lot of people that are getting food supplies from food banks or food parcels from charities, etc. And they are looking at those men predominantly, but there are some women in those hotels and thinking, hang about, you're getting put up in a hotel and you're getting food delivered 3 times a day. Why is that happening to you when I know someone who that's not happening to? And it's quite a simple premise that they're coming from, food and accommodation. That's what seems to be riling them up.
But there is an element of otherness, though, isn't it? That these people that they are talking about are not British, and that is something that is mentioned every time we talk about the problems associated with migration.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, I can only speak for James and Oscar, what they've said to me. I didn't get any feeling whatsoever from James or Oscar of what I would think is malevolence or hatred towards brown-skinned people, refugees. I didn't get that feeling. However, I do not dispute that a lot of the rioting was driven by that. I think it got like the right wing or whatever you want to call them, sort of whipping them up. I think it's quite easy for people who are dubious about migrants and hotels. I think it's quite easy for them to get caught up that people follow the crowd or something along those lines.
So where are they getting their information from? Because it's not from you and it's not from me.
No, I mean, they totally dismiss mainstream media. They dismiss us as journalists, that we don't listen to them, we don't do our jobs properly. They were listening to what I would describe as anti-immigrant television, YouTubers. Some of them have got millions of followers, and they are sitting and watching this day in, day out.
I believe it just tells it as it is. It tells the truth. I can't remember the last time we watched the news. We always watch this stuff. We get up in the morning and it's on. When I wake up, GG media, TV.
But I did find it fascinating that they dismissed Sky News for covering Katie Price's bankruptcy and said that has nothing to do with my life. That has no bearing on my life.
Yeah, Katie Price it's like, is this, and that was on the BBC. Because she's bankrupt. So it was like, man, This ain't news. But
People just put a
bombs
ticket.
going left, right, and centre, and that, and it's
Keep facing
right.
his court because he's bankrupt. Like I give a flying.
This guy on YouTube, he's speaking to me. I think we need to be aware of that as journalists. We need to think about that.
We do, but we also need to be aware that a lot of the content that these so-called citizen journalists are producing is not journalism at all. It's polemicism, it's mistruth, it's
I agree.
falsehood.
I said exactly that to them. I said, that guy's not a journalist. He doesn't have to corroborate anything. He doesn't have to check his facts. He doesn't work under any of the restrictions that we work under. And this is a problem, but it's hard to explain to people because they don't trust us anyway.
But when it comes to othering a group of people who are entirely foreign, the assumption amongst many people has always been that a large part of what happened in August was down to racism. When it came to Oscar and James, I mean, they really bridle at the suggestion that just because they are not in favour of mass migration, they are de facto racist. They really dislike that view.
I mean, James was quite eloquent and he had an understanding of what refugees might have gone through.
I've got a problem with immigrants. I don't. But the thing is people get carried away in a moment, you know. And I think for the majority it was just frustration. I believe they just wanted to kick back at the people that are in here. I don't think everybody thinks like me and goes, God bless them, they've got a problem too. Because they have got problems. Yeah. They've been through hell. They've been through war zones and this, that and the other, you know. And I think people at the time just felt a lot of anger, a lot of frustration that, there's people living on the streets that are British born and are not getting looked after. I look at the pain in people's eyes sometimes and you just think to yourself, you think, don't you, what the hell? What's going on?
He really didn't have that sort of opinion of, I hate them, they shouldn't be here. He seemed to be of the mind, it's okay if they're here as long as everyone is being looked after. And, obviously it's arguable whether migrants and asylum seekers are being looked after by the state, because lots of them would say they're not. But as far as James is concerned, they're getting catered for when his people, in his words, are being ignored.
I mean, what is indisputable is that in Hull itself, there are problems with access to services, with provision of food, with provision of accommodation. Tell me just a little bit about Adapt Resettlement. It's not quite a charity, it's not quite a company, explain.
It's a community interest company, so it's kind of a quasi-charity, and it's not a fully profit-making business. It's run by a woman called Liz Ward, who's a lawyer by trade. It's established in order to support people who are homeless but have other vulnerabilities. So they could be drug addicted or pregnant, come out of prison, really people who need the most help in society. They come to Adapt Resettlement. She will, or her team, Danny and Lisa, will find them help with housing, and then they'll provide additional support. It's really important stuff that they're doing.
So we just stand them out to some of our tenants who are struggling that week. We have about 25 tenants and we just have to share them out who's more in need, really. So it depends on whether rings us or comes in for one, then we'll just hand them out to. So it does make a lot of difference. They do depend on them quite a lot. Yeah. So yeah, it is good that they can get these. Really.
So what does Adapt Resettlement, what the people that you spoke to working there, what do they think the views of Oscar and James that, it is unfair, that we have so very little, they have so very much?
Well, given that their role and what they do is provide support, food, housing for people, they have an understanding because they can see the other side of how people are actually living and what they're going through.
Not everybody was in that riots for the same reason. There'll have been people in that riots because they are homeless, they haven't had help, but that doesn't make them racist. They just wanted to get their point across. If they've got drug problems, mental health problems, even just living on the street, it's a war every day for them. So I get what they're saying, that they're fleeing wars, but I was fighting a daily war.
You do get these coming across and they're getting in hotels and they're getting fed 3 times a day. I was probably can't eat sometimes once a day.
I wouldn't use the word sympathetic with the rioters, but they did understand why people felt angry. And so they had a level of understanding that I think has been lacking in a lot of people I've spoken to outside of places like Hull. They know the people that have rioted and demonstrated. They're working with people who do sympathise. So they had an understanding of why people did that.
That feels like a very good place just to take a breather for a second. We'll be back after the break, continuing to talk about what Sarah has learnt about Hull, the riots, and the reasons underpinning. Welcome back to the Daily Podcast. So Sarah, just speaking about the kind of the broader politics of this for a moment. I mean, do you detect anything in this new Labour government, new Home Secretary, for example, that indicates that they have an idea, that they are aware of this body of opinion, and it is a sizable body of opinion as well, we should remember?
Interestingly, I found an article a couple of weeks ago of the now Home Secretary criticising the government for placing refugees in places like Hull, because it's been shown statistically that refugees have been placed in the poorest parts of the country. So then she was very critical of it. I don't know whether her stance has changed or not now. I'm not convinced that the current government does understand. I mean, like Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, came out and said far-right thuggery. That's how he described the rioters. And while I do not deny that far-right thuggery was definitely an element of the riots, it wasn't the only element. And from what I've seen in Hull, I think it had one of the lowest voter rates in the country. People did not engage with politics, the Labour Party, whoever. And I do think there's a kind of high-handedness, I feel, in government, all governments.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about your journalism. I can talk to you a bit about mine. 2010 general election. I met a lady called Gillian Duffy, who was out on the campaign. That was me that day. Gordon Brown had been at a campaign event. This lovely old lady was just out buying a loaf of bread, came up, had a chat with him about mass migration. She went off, Gordon Brown got in the car. Yes. We all thought everything was fine. Then Gordon Brown was caught on microphone.
Yes.
What did she say? Oh, everything. She's just a sort of bigoted woman. Said she used to be Labour. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Politically, isn't it just easier for politicians to kind of stay away from discussions like this? Because ultimately, you know, if you sat down and talked to James or Oscar or Gillian Duffy back then, you would be told in fairly unvarnished terms, you know, just what it has been like in various communities in this country with a mass influx of people from outside the UK.
Well, politically, obviously it would be easier to ignore the James and Oscars of this world in the short term. I mean, it's easier as journalists to ignore them, isn't it? Because we could just carry on regardless. In the long term, I don't think politically it's an intelligent thing to do at all. Short term, yes, but long term, these people are not going to go away, and neither should they go away. They're part of the British public. You know, we need to. There needs to be more conversations, and as I said before, people were thanking me for hearing what they were saying. They obviously don't feel as if people like us hear what they say.
So what do we do about it?
You know, journalism really benefits, I think, from actually spending time with people and, you know, repeating, going back to them, not just a one-off, because people don't tell you very much in the first time you meet them. And I think we should spend more time doing that. I mean, obviously, being a natural optimist, I don't think that it has to remain like that forever. You know, I don't think all these poor northerners, if you want to call them that, are all crazy right-wing fascists. I don't think that. So where there's life, there's hope. I just think we need to keep pushing back against it and explaining to people what's actually going on. And what else can we do? That's our job.
Sarah, been a pleasure to talk to you.
You too. You're welcome.
And that is your lot for today. If you want much more on this story, you can find it on the Sky News website. Do get in touch with your reviews as well. Sky News Daily at sky.uk is the email. You can find me on X and on Insta at Sky News Neil. We'll see you tomorrow.